What's up, YouTube? So I want to redo my video on minimal audio current. So just before you post something in the comments about the subscription and that kind of stuff, I get you. I understand. I feel exactly the same. If you didn't see the previous video that I did, I actually put a disclaimer there, but I feel like a lot of people perhaps missed the disclaimer and things have changed. Minimal Audio seems to have listened to our pleas to, can the subscription model, and they've gone with a rent-to-own / perpetual license model. So a lot of the stuff that I spoke about in the previous video is actually still valid, and I still stand by it. But I just want to add a couple of extra things into the picture, just because of how I guess my perspective has slightly changed based on the pricing model, but I also just want to, inform you folks a little bit better about the overall picture from a, let's say, more objective standpoint. So a couple of things I also just want to be completely clear on. I'm not just blind shilling the company because I've worked with them in the past or because there's any kind of monetary incentive on my part. There isn't. The videos in this video, in fact, and all the videos that I've done with minimal audio in the past have been done completely for free. I started off as a customer first and foremost. I bought their first plugin that they ever released, and I saw the vision and I kind of aligned with it. So for me, this is not about the company, and this is more about the product itself. I'm pretty excited about new synths. I don't know if you guys have seen on my channel before. I kind of get a little bit fanboyish when new synths get launched. So just disregard any kind of shill kind of ideas that you have about myself. I purely just look at the products. I'm less of a reviewer and more of a tutorial / sound design content creator. That being said, I did learn quite a severe lesson on this one, and I will definitely do my due diligence in the future and be a little bit more stringent in the type of content, or let's just say the companies that I work with, and I'll just be 100% sure that I know all of the details up front before going ahead, because I feel like now in retrospect, just slapping the disclaimer on was probably a little bit lazy on my part, and I apologize for that. So like I said, a lot of the points that I spoke about in the original video are actually still valid. So I want to talk about what I think are some of the special features about minimal audio current. So straight off the bat, you may or may not know minimal audio, but they've been making some really sick effects plugins, stuff like Rift, Cluster Delay, Morph EQ, some of my favorites. So all of those effects are essentially built inside current. So Morph EQ, which was a crazy equalizer plugin, I guess it's more of a filter, more of a creative tool than a kind of EQ. Anyway, I always said, when I was looking at this plugin, I always said, this would truly excel inside a synth because you can kind of draw these, custom curves. And so, yeah, basically all of the minimal audio's effects are basically built into the synth. It's got your traditional wavetable modes, 2 wavetable oscillators. It's got spectral morphing like we've seen in Vital. However, it's got so many more modes that are actually really, really interesting and usable. It's also got the traditional warp modes, and then a bunch of other features that make it special, which we're going to dive into a little bit later. Then we have a granular oscillator, which of course is quite self-explanatory. Then we also have a sampler and a sub-oscillator. So this may not be obvious at first, but the sub-oscillator is a kind of basic additive synth, because you've got partials and you've got the ability to actually, tweak the partials in real time. This is essentially an additive synth. And then you have a sampler as well. So essentially, Current has an oscillator mode for almost all of the contemporary synthesizer methods that we know of. It also has a really advanced FM system over here, where you can not only grab, FM from B and all that kind of stuff, which we know, but it's also got internal feedback mode. So by default, the oscillators are just FMing themselves, which is really, really cool. Not many other plugins allow for real-time FM feedback. I believe Phaseplant is one of the very few. So already, straight off the bat, Current does something that stuff like Serum and Vital just don't do. So the next really interesting feature is the fact that they've got this thing called Stream, which is basically like a cloud-based preset / wavetable / sample browser. So as it stands on the website, you can actually see they've updated the payment plan options that you could see on the website when I first launched the video. They've updated it to say that we're changing to unlimited access, rent-to-own, and perpetual options. Feel free to sign up. We'll notify you of the changes to plans before your free trial ends. All plans will be converted to RTO. So as far as I'm aware, the rent-to-own plans will essentially be this value every year back to you in coupons and vouchers, very similarly to how Kilohertz does it with Faceplant or with Snapheap and Multipass. Rent-to-own plan essentially includes the stream, which I was just talking about. So I don't believe stream is included in the perpetual options. I think maybe you have access to stream and you can maybe I think audition some of the sounds that are on stream, and you can perhaps buy them like upfront with, you know, perpetual license options. So that leads me to believe that the true value is in the rent-to-own plan, very similarly to Kilohertz. You know, with Kilohertz, you get the sound content when you do the rent-to-own plan. And then you also get the coupons back, which you can then use to buy that sound content perpetually, or buy their other kind of more premium plugins perpetually. So I think this system is actually far better, not only than just the perpetual license, but it also gives those who want new sounds and who want new presets and that kind of thing on a monthly basis, there's that incentive to get involved. It rewards the long-term supporters, and I think that's great. So the true value would actually be in the yearly plan, because you pay $10 a month and you'll get value back equivalent to $15 a month at the end. I think they said something like $180 in coupons. Don't quote me on that though. I'll kind of edit it in where I need to. You know, sometimes when plugins ship with hundreds of presets, say like 80% of those presets will never make it into your personal music. I feel like music is such a, you know, with different genres and everything, it's such a personal thing. So being able to kind of curate your own sound library based on the sounds that you're most likely to use, I think is really special. But also it means that, you know, we're going to get these live updates with new sounds that are going to keep being added to the cloud, and we can kind of just grab and use them as we need. And then some of the extra features that make it truly special compared to Serum, Vital, Pigments, that kind of thing. Okay, maybe not Pigments. Pigments does have an arpeggiator and a chord mode and that kind of thing. Definitely Serum and Vital. We have an arpeggiator mode built in here, so we can generate arpeggiators directly in the patch. We don't need any third-party stuff. We've got a chord mode, so we can just fire off chords as we need. We can lock the chords to specific scales or keys, but even kind of like internally, we can turn these off. Even internally, just the oscillators can be locked to specific scales. So say, for example, we want just harmonic minor notes to play. We can lock it so that it's only going to play notes in the C harmonic minor scale. Or we can set, for example, like F. And we can just hit random notes and it's always going to sound in scale. Pretty cool. Okay, so that's it for the features that I believe are truly special. Let's go into some kind of more finicky, fine details and do some sound design examples. So a couple of the things which I think make this truly special, specifically for PSYTRANCE bass. In the spectral morph modes, we have a disperse mode, which, as you can see by the waveform, looks a lot more like the traditional dispersion mode that we know. Vitals was a little bit too round, and the sound wasn't as cutting edge as, you know, we kind of like to do with PSYTRANCE bass lines. So the only other synth that I know that had this built in, this kind of true dispersion mode built in, is Faceplant. Obviously, they're the creators of the original disperser plugin, so they would get it right. However, the thing with Faceplant is you have to create it in a wavetable and set it to your favorite and kind of set it and forget it, if that makes sense. Whereas here, we can kind of live update it as we need. So it's not a destructive effect that we're applying to the wavetable. It's non-destructive, so we can fine-tune it later on down the line if we need to. Very, very nice effect. For those who don't know what this is essentially emulating the sound of a multiband process. However, the problem with most multiband processes is that they have stuff like post-ring and that kind of thing. So they make it a little bit harder to deal with the envelopes of sounds. So most of the time when producers are using multiband effects, they end up rendering the bass down to a sample. Whereas here, if we have this effect directly in the actual oscillator, we don't have to do any of that rendering. We can have our bass live synthesized in the patch, and it's going to sound in the synth, and it's going to sound clean always, hopefully. So in theory, at least. The next big thing that I think is incredibly important for PSYTRANCE bass lines is the incredibly accurate envelope response. So not only does this have just like incredibly accurate envelopes, we can sync them so that, for example, we can know exactly when the 16th note will be. So let's say, for example, click this auto and it updates the envelope live. So if we adjust this, you're going to see it's going to basically adjust the envelope live as we kind of tweak this like this. So for example, let's set it to 16. Then if we unsync it, you'll see it snaps to the decay of a 16th, right? Which would be about 136 milliseconds. So it does all that calculations and that kind of thing. A lot of the time with PSYTRANCE producers, they work out how many milliseconds the 16th note is, set the decay to that. But you can just do that automatically in the plugin, and then you can adjust it from there. So say, for example, we want the decay to go down, but then we still want some sustain on the note in case we have held notes. So we can still create these incredibly sharp curves with sustain, and we can always maintain that it's going to hit the certain point at the 16th. And you see here, if we hover over this note, it actually gives us that 1/16. So very, very cool little stuff that's kind of built in here. So again, with the release, you can see here, you've got this exact time of the release. So what I'll generally do is set it to sync and then fine tune it from there. Does that make sense? So the plugin does the calculation, and then I can just fine tune it a little bit if I need. I'll go just a little bit underneath the 16th, just so we know that it's going to end on the 16th. Does that make sense? But we still have the ability to sustain the note if we need. Okay, so here what I want to do is I want to apply this to a filter, and we want to do a similar thing with the amplitude envelope as well. So let's just click auto, let's sync it, set this to 1/16. You know what? In fact, we want to set the tempo first, because obviously the plugin is getting its calculation from the tempo. Then let's go over here, sync, and then unsync. And now you see it's actually recalculated that decay time, which is really, really, really cool. So you don't have to do these calculations every time you change the tempo. It's automatically worked that out. And so now we can just go a little bit under the 16th. Same with this one, sync and unsync. A little bit under the 16th, give it some sustain, reduce the release, give it some curve. Okay, let's apply this envelope to a filter. So let's enable one of the filters. Here we have various different filter modes. We have LP 6, 12, 24, 36, 48. Same with HP. Bandpass, we have 12, 24, 36, 48. We also have notches and various other creative filters. Obviously for PSYTRANCE bass, I generally go with 12 or 24. But here we can also stack it in interesting ways where we could have, for example, parallel filters and set this to LP6. So essentially what we're doing here is we're creating an 18, LP18, I think, which a 12 and a 6 in parallel, I believe is an 18. I might be wrong. Series, I forget which one. Anyway, regardless, we can set it up in various interesting ways as we need to. So what I want to do is just turn this filter all the way down, and we can apply this envelope to both of these. Let's put in some notes over here. Okay, so by default, there is some resonance, which we're going to want to turn off. I've just realized I left the EQ on in the effects, so that's why there's like a weird thing happening there. Let's just turn that off. Oh, also, I forgot that one of the most important things is the phase randomization. When you set this to 0. There we go. So one of the downsides is that it doesn't actually have a built-in wavetable editor. However, like traditional wavetable synths, you can just drag in existing samples and use them as wavetables. Like for example, like here, I'm dragging in a kick. So you can use like a kick as a wavetable, or any sample, in fact. And then we can apply various different spectral modes. So I feel like there's so much variation that you can do with these warp modes that you almost don't need a wavetable editor. That sounds so cool. Just like that. Okay, let's put a little bit of effects. Let's put some cluster delay over here. I should mention also how incredibly intuitive this plugin is. It's like everything is exactly where you expect it to be, you know? Each individual effects plugin has its own set of presets, which I think is really, really cool. You can get some cool sounds very, very quickly. Let's move these down a little bit. Let's put the fuse compressor right at the beginning. Then we can perhaps put another fuse compressor right at the end here. Okay, let me show you the FM system real quick. So, like I said, by default, the oscillators are FM feedbacking into themselves, so you can just turn it up and get some interesting tones. But we could also set it up so, like, for example, it's getting FM from oscillator B. We can turn this on, turn the volume down. We can also, of course, go the other way around. So let's say oscillator A, FM, and we can stack them. So you can have A going into B and B going into A. So like you can't do that, I believe, in Vital or Serum. When you start to feedback each other, they will cancel, like the option will cancel. So when I put in oscillator here, A here, the oscillator B will gray out. Does that make sense? So the truly special thing here is the feedback system. But I don't want that actually for this patch. Let's just turn this one off. And then we can turn this down and this up. So now the complex wavetable is actually the one that's generating the modulator signal for the FM. How crazy does that sound? It sounds such good quality. And something to note also is here, for example, we can set the oversampling on to 4x so that it oversamples the wavetables like it would in Serum by default or Vital and stuff like that. However, this by default is off and still, to my ear, sounds just as good quality as any of the current synths. So I haven't actually even messed with this oversampling settings. To me, the oscillators just sound good enough. So I don't need that kind of extra stuff. Maybe it's got to do with something like the fact that we're not really doing too much wavetable editing. So we're not dealing with individual frames and how those frames are sampled. We're dealing more with how the spectral data is created from the sampled data. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's look at the modulations. So you have, by default, 9 built-in modulation systems that are each independent. So you can choose whether you want it to be an envelope, an LFO, a curve, or a follow. So the envelope are the traditional envelopes like I showed you for the bass. Then we can actually set these over to like LFOs. So this is the same LFO as we've seen in Rift. Remember the whole randomize LFO thing? I really, really like this. See, what it does is you can basically choose a shape style. So we can say, for example, we want rounded randomizations, or we want triangular ones, or we want ramps, or we want squares. And each one is a different style of random. Most of the time I'll end up going with square or sine, but just being able to fine tune your own style of randoms, I think, is super powerful. So this can obviously be triggered, it can be free, it can be one shot. So you can kind of use it as like an envelope. Does that make sense? But with this weird wonky sound each time it one shots, you know, so you can get some really interesting effects that way. So curve is basically like the curve system in Rift, where we can kind of draw these interesting shapes and stuff, and you can actually get some really complex stuff like by editing these. Shift resets the curves, but then you can actually like fine tune them and do all sorts of weird things. So you can do these really weird rounded curves rather than just like curve into something. You can do this like round Bezier curves, which are pretty interesting for modulations. You know, you can get some pretty wonky stuff this way. You can also quickly invert any of these selections that you have here. So if you want like a side chaining effect or the same thing the other way, it's a very, very cool system that they've built here. You can choose from various different divisions here. Odd, triplets, standards. So, I mean, most of the time we'll go with the standards, but you can do like odds and triplets and that kind of thing. But the cool thing is that they've kind of put it in a separate folder. So most of the time you'll just go with the standards. But if you need that extra experimental stuff, it's there. There's also randomization where you can kind of randomize different curves. But you can also choose, like, for example, how many dots you want in the randomization. And this is one of the coolest because look how you don't only have stepped or round, it's like randomizing all different styles of curves. So if we're just getting quick, weird ideas out there, very, very cool system. Now we can choose the rate over here. So the arpeggiator is not only good as a traditional ARP. This skip parameter over here, I believe what this does is it randomly skips steps in the arpeggiator. So if you just trigger a single note and use the skip parameter, set it to 16th, you're basically creating a random gate sequence. And it's just so elegant and so intuitive and so quick. Man, it's just, they must have thought about all of this stuff and how workflow is like so important, you know, in music. I feel like so many plugins have just like every feature under the sun, but forget that like how hard it is to dial those specific features in. You know what I mean? Where this is just so like, so intuitive. So let's just put in one long note. Okay, so quickly before we get done, I want to show you how cool the FORMANT filters in this synth sound. So let's just go with a saw wave. I want to quickly put in some effects. Let's go with Rift. And we can put in some delay. So quickly off the bat, I want to show you how to make a 1/8 dotted. We're going to set this to 2 taps, set this scatter, and then you can make a ping pong that way. Okay, cool. Let's look at some of these FORMANT filters. So my favorites are the mid, because they cut out the high and low frequency, so you're getting a true FORMANT sound. Whereas sometimes you get, here for example, the full, which is has some lows and highs in it, so it kind of sounds a bit more like the kilohertz formants, which maybe sound more realistic, but they're not like the old school formant filter, which we know from Delay Lama style sounds, you know? Jake from Minimal Audio himself actually made an apology video and spoke about what happened, their plans for the future. And in that video, they spoke about what they believe would be a fair price for the perpetual license. And he mentioned $200. So this may change, but I don't feel like this is too badly priced. Of course, there's the elephant in the room of Faceplant. You know, we were just talking about kilohertz. And the perpetual license to Faceplant is $199. You can get it on special sometimes for a little bit cheaper, but regardless, the retail price is $199. So if we just compare, you know, apples to apples, there are one or two extra things that Current has that Faceplant doesn't have, like that kind of additive sub-oscillator. Bear in mind, there are only 8 partials, so you could build very similar things within the generator section of Faceplant. But then Faceplant has certain things in terms of, I think, workflow that Current doesn't have. And so let's say, for example, if we had to see some updates in the near future with stuff like undo, redo, which I think is a big one, a wavetable editor, which I think is a big one, and some kind of mod remap system, then I think that the value of Current at $200 for the perpetual license seems a lot more in line with the competition. Again, I think that the true value is actually in the yearly RTO plan, but they're not paying me to say that. Just bear that in mind. I just think, obviously, there are those who don't want the sounds. You know, people may be more like myself who just want a sound design and use the core synth. At least we have the option to buy the perpetual license. So I do really hope in the future that we see an undo, redo, wavetable editor, and a mod remap. But that being said, I think there are already some truly special features. So one thing that I didn't actually mention in the original video that I think is kind of in line with a lot of the things that we see in Faceplant, and actually thanks Alchemy Neuro for bringing this to the forefront of my mind, because obviously it was a feature and I realized it, but I didn't actually see it in context and how powerful it could be. So the multi-effect system actually has its own preset system. So here we can pull up a preset of an entire rack of effects, and we can create our own preset. Each individual effect in the rack has its own set of presets. So I think this is truly special because you can basically pull up a preset and get a sound going without even focusing too much on the core engine. That's where I think the effects in the minimal audio stuff truly shines. I also want to address something about minimal audio not informing us content creators about the initial fallout with the subscription and subsequent switch over. They have apologized to me and did a bit of an apology in the retraction video as well. And in speaking to Jake from Minimal, I kind of understand, you know, I'm not going to speak for the company. I'm not going to speak for you folks. But for me personally, I'll just say that everybody makes mistakes, you know, myself included. and they're a smaller company, and these things can just be equated to a mistake. I wouldn't always equate something to malice, but in this regard, I just want to give them the benefit of the doubt because it's the first time. Like I said, I've always had good experience with minimal audio in the past, and first and foremost, I was a customer rather than a shill or content creator or whatever the case is. So yeah, that being said, is they have apologized. I kind of do see where the screw up could have happened. But again, I'm not excusing it, and I'm just equating it to a very bad mistake. So yeah, that's my take. Cool. So hopefully that's a little bit more of an objective view on the new minimal audio Current. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you liked this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys next time. Cheers.